Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to the Prose and Cons podcast. We are a podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. This morning, who is ready to rumble? We have in the ring today, James Healy.
How's it going?
Phoenix Raig.
Hello.
And in the other corner, we have Alex Eldridge.
Let's do this.
And
Did everybody have a pause when they were trying to think of like a wrestle intro?
I almost said more. That's why my intro kind of stopped at with a weird tone because I was gonna say something and I just didn't.
Yeah, same.
On the spot. So
I was prepared.
I could have hyped everyone up a little bit more. But we are a fatal four-way here today, and I am your commentator of the match, Ali Burnham. As you may have guessed, there's a bit of a theme to today's podcast. We're going to drop this episode ahead of WrestleMania. Let me get this right. 39. There's been quite a few WrestleManias. I feel like I've lost track of them in the past couple of years. It's a good way to feel really old. But we are up to WrestleMania 39 this year. It's another WWE Goes Hollywood, which is really exciting. I think the last time they did that was like WrestleMania 21. And anyway, as you're getting the impression, I'm a big pro wrestling fan, and I have been since forever. And I don't think I talk about this enough because I feel like a lot of my very early storytelling and love for the action genre is actually rooted in growing up on a diet of pro wrestling. And I think it informs a lot of my writing and my taste today. And I do have a bit of an axe to grind when I tell people this in kind of the art circles I'm in, and like when I went to NIDA and I'm like, wow, this thing we're discussing about this really important play reminds me of the time Triple H and Randy Orton were in a Hell in a Cell match. And I would like, and I would just relate it to this other point in my knowledge. And I don't know, that there's an elitism to wrestling, and I have very firmly been on my soapbox ever since, being like, the art form of pro wrestling has a lot to teach us. Us as writers can learn a lot about the narrative, long form and short form structure of storytelling in wrestling. So that is what today's podcast is all about. Before we do that, I will throw it around to everyone and ask what we've been reading, watching, and consuming this week. I'll throw it over to you, James.
This week I watched, if I can remember the name of it, The Unbearable Weight of Incredible Talent. It's the Nicolas Cage, Pedro Pascal film. Absolutely adored it. I thought it was hilarious.
Can't wait to watch it.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I won't really say anything about it then. Just dive in. Anyone who appreciates Nicolas Cage, the kind of overacting and the kind of just the general vibe of Nicolas Cage will absolutely adore it. And then Pedro Pascal is great in it as well. So yeah, it's a really, really fun watch. Stop what you're doing right now and go watch it. It's great crack. That's it's pretty much all I've been watching. Doing a lot of writing. I think I've smashed about 3,000 words over the past 2 days of Scavenger's Tread, which is the novel I'm working on.
Nice.
I'm sort of doing a second pass on the first draft because I realized I skipped massive chunks of it because I was kind of unsure of what the characters were doing and where they were supposed to be. So now I'm going back and doing, I can't call it a second draft because so much of it is not there. So it's just a second pass of the first draft, and it feels way more cohesive now that I know where everything's going. So I'm able to come in and write it with a sense of pace and build the character friction and stuff like that. So that's going pretty well as well.
Good feelings. How are you going, Phoenix?
Oh, I'm going great. By the way, I have a little bit of makeup on, and the name, I was thinking like maybe my wrestling name could be, it's like kind of like a cheetah, but at the same time, I think I like the messy crier more. So that's my wrestling name. today,
Uh,
and I do want to throw down. I'm gonna win this podcast episode, and all my comments are gonna be the best. That's all I have to say.
Been consuming anything this week?
Yeah, I've been going ham on some anime recently. I finished Spy Family. I finished Yuri on Ice, which was amazing, very amazing. And now I'm watching an anime. I'm just leaning harder and harder into slice of life. So now I'm watching an anime that's literally about a company making an anime, and it's
Wow.
following anyone anyone who does like creative work professionally, I feel would appreciate it, and just like the stress and the amount of work that goes like they're it's so satisfying. I'm almost done with Harry Potter, which I'm very excited about. And that's about it. Listening to some podcasts. One of which is what is it called? Magic Lessons, which is by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she also wrote the book Big Magic, which she then went on to make this podcast, which is kind of tackling the topic of creativity and the right to be creative and all these things. It's really beautiful. It's very therapeutic. I feel like this podcast, you'll probably like that podcast. It's very therapeutic as a writer as well as a general creative. She has dancers on there, all these people struggling with different creative aspirations, and then like we'll have some sort of more established person come on to kind of talk about the person's problem at the end. So like one I listened to had Neil Gaiman at the end, and him and Elizabeth Gilbert just talked about some woman that was having trouble with her second novel and the pressures from things like that. It's very, very cool. So big Magic Lessons, if you're interested, I recommend that.
Sounds great. And what have you been reading, writing, consuming, Alex?
I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring, which is so hard. It's just so unforgiving. I'm a really big fan of the Soul series, but it's just so unforgiving. It's just so. I just had to start again and start with the strength-based class, because it's just like it's just too hard to So I've been doing a lot of that, and that's been fun. But I've also been watching, because we just got a Crunchyroll subscription. I've been going over Fruits Basket with my girlfriend.
Which one?
The new one, the
newer version.
Yeah,
yeah.
Which is just the nicest little shoujo. It's just like one of the things that annoys me about animes, and this is maybe more of a pet peeve for me than the actual form itself, is that the episodic form of things, and it's by no means just confined to anime. The episodic form of it often feels a little like shoehorned in. It's like, yeah, okay, you did a whole cycle there, but for this one, for every episode, it just ties in so nicely with the previous ones, and it's like, oh, there was a legitimate bit of character growth here. That it's just like, I don't know. I haven't seen a whole lot of shoujo, but it feels like it feels like very high tier level of that. So I'm really enjoying that, to be honest. It's it's just nice to. I don't know if you'd call that technically slice of life, because it is contiguous, but it is very charming. So I've been watching.
Yeah, no, I love the narrative. What am I trying to say? I feel like my imagination puts so much into Fruits Basket, and that's what I get out of. Like, the story is the story, but it's got a lot of weird things to say about gender and hierarchy and Japanese traditions. And I'm like, this family is weird, and that's worth unpacking. And I'm fascinated by whatever's going on behind the scenes of Fruits Basket. That keeps me invested.
There's a lot to unpack for sure. Like the girl who comes in and you're like, is there some BPD going in here where you like go in and you love the guy and you beat him up, and like, I don't know.
There's weird characters that in
a
slightly different genre or audience or lens, you could take that narrative to some weird places.
Oh yeah.
I have to rewatch this one. It's been very long.
Yeah.
There's two versions of it too. There's the original anime, which I think was the 90s or maybe early 2000s, because it was based on a manga. And then there's a new one, which my girlfriend Liz tells me is much better. The animation quality, at the very least, is much better. It's not sort of like
it's just a bit more
faces,
tighter and schmick.
Yeah.
But the same narrative. And for myself, I'm still playing quite a lot of Hogwarts Legacy, an alarming
nice.
amount, because I'm kind of like, I need to get on the other side of this before I can get my life back. I'm
Yep.
kind of in that hole of gaming.
Mm.
And look, at least with the narrative that's unfolding in front of me, it is the gayest love story, and I adore it. my boy Alistair and Sebastian, and their little tiffs they're having, but then they send notes via Al and apologize to each other, and then they
Oh
go
my
off
God.
and make more mistakes and deal with being teenage boys. Basically, that's the narrative that's unfolding in front of me, and there's broomsticks and magic, and a lot of goblins are getting killed. I'm loving it. I don't know what anyone else's experience, because I've stayed off the internet because I'm like, I don't want any part of the discourse. That sounds like a
Same.
headache. I just want to have a me in the game experience.
Yeah,
So I don't actually know narrative spoilers. I don't know where it's going. I'm convinced my boyfriend's going to kill himself. But only I can be there for him to try and help him through this. So we will see how that goes. Otherwise, I've been watching Shadow and Bone on Netflix because I have read the books, and it is an exercise in a bizarre adaptation, this TV show. It is. I've got a lot of questions about pacing and what happened in the writers' room. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I would say strap in with some popcorn, maybe get a little bit drunk, try and watch the show, and I don't know, maybe you'll learn about what not to do with writing adaptations.
I feel like that's the best.
Yeah.
That's the best bad review of an adaptation.
Yeah, like I like sitting there trying to
It's
unpick, why
educational.
would they possibly make that decision? That's fascinating. So maybe that's the nicest thing I'll say about it.
Love it.
I made
All
a
right.
note: Shadow and Bone get a little drunk, and
Get a little
that
drunk.
sounds nice.
Get a little
Goes
drunk
down
and
with the
strap
dark and
in.
stormy really well.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn this conversation back to the main event.
Very nice.
So,
Very nice.
I want to start by asking what everyone's ground zero relationship with pro wrestling is. Just go around the room. Let me know if you grew up watching it, if you didn't grow up watching it, if you have any knowledge of it at all. Let me know.
Well, I had a friend who, when I was very young, I think one of my first best friends actually, and he went through a phase where he was obsessed with this. I mean, there are a few other ones like Pokemon cards, and he went through a few phases, but he knew all the characters, and this would have been, I think, around the Triple H Randy Orton period. I don't know what that era is called, but
The
anyway,
ruthless aggression era. That sounds kind
yeah.
of 2000s. Yeah.
Anyway, so he was a very big fan of it. Then I was always a little bit bemused. I was like, this seems cool, but I don't know anything about it, and I don't have Foxtel, so I don't know. And then recently, a very close friend of Liz's, my girlfriend, made us watch I forget exactly what it was, but some sort of wrestling match, like over when we were in the States. And I was like, oh, I see how this works. I see the flow of this. So I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I respect the art form, and I've always had a lot of fun whenever I've watched it.
Brilliant. How about you, James?
I never watched it, but it's kind of similar to Alex. All of my friends watched it growing up. And they talked about it all the time, and I was trying to be like, where should I jump in? What episode and stuff like this? And they were kind of like, oh, it's not episodes. It's like, it's a real thing. It really happens. And I was kind of like, oh, it sounds like a hump I'd have to get over to sort of catch up with everybody. So I kind of just never got involved. But I would have seen, I guess, fights and stuff like that from them watching it. I know there's a video game where a rock gets assaulted in an alleyway or something like this. So that's my awareness of it is from quite a distance.
Brilliant. And how about you, Phoenix?
Yeah, also quite a distance. Like it's always been this thing in my periphery that I just didn't know. I didn't know what was going on there. As a kid, all I knew was like, there's this wrestling with people in leather on TV. At the same time at school, there are these people on the wrestling team. And I'm just like looking at these two things
How
like,
are these two related.
We call these both wrestling. I don't know what's going on here. And then
Something
it wasn't
happens.
until
There's a tradition, or there's an escalation.
yeah, and I didn't realize it was like fake, and like knew it was fake until way later on. And I, as a kid, I was just like, well, these are people, muscly people. They're on TV, so I guess these are our ultimate fighters. Like they're real combat people, and this is crazy. And then way later I realized kind of like what the vibe was, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And now that's how much I know.
Fascinating. I love learning that there was a period where you all well, at least James and Phoenix have said you remember at least being told that this is a real thing. Before finding out that it's not. Because my experience is my mum introduced me to wrestling, which is really cool because I have this very like cool matriarch relationship with wrestling. It's not like, it was never a boys thing for me. My mum was into wrestling, got me into wrestling.
Oh, we're getting the deep Alley Burnham lore now. I like this.
Yeah. No, we can go back a step further. So my mum's from a very small like farming town, and she told me that they would go to church on every Sunday, and then they would come home, and that's when Hulk Hogan was on the TV. So every Sunday the family goes to church and then watches pro wrestling, and that's the routine. and then that's something she wanted to share with me. Yeah.
Can I ask,
what was going
Allie,
on there?
Does the name Haystacks Calhoun ring a bell at all?
Actually, no.
So this was because I have a similar story from my dad. Like he said, wrestling used to be not the WWE, but it used to be a thing like way back in the day when it was black and white, and the characters were way more stereotyped. There were some very questionable like racial ideologies and things going on. There was like like Attila or something. Like there's a bunch of stuff going on. But he one that really stuck out to me was apparently this guy called Haystacks Calhoun, who was just a big fat guy in overalls who'd just do. I forget exactly what it was like. It was like the haystack flop or something. You'd just like fall on it. I don't know. Anyway, that like like that's always a part of my memory. He's like, oh yeah, we used to watch wrestling on the TV way back in the day, and I think that's a precursor to the maybe a little more sophisticated version of it now. Anyway,
I adore that it's kind of this intergenerational thing that it's you love it as a kid. And then you get your kids into it, and then now we're reaching kind of almost era 3 of that. Like parents are getting, so it's in the same way that, you know, the parents who grew up reading Marvel comics are now taking their kids to the Marvel movies. Like it's wrestling has that same lineage of fandom, and that's really special. In the same way that comic books are an ongoing story that's never really ended, so is wrestling. So you can just come in and out of the narrative across decades and find out who's doing what when. But yes, my relationship with it is, maybe I didn't have it growing up really young, because again, we didn't have Foxtel, and it was a big deal. I remember when we first got Foxtel when maybe I was 12. And Mum's like, half the reason we're paying for this is because it's time that we brought wrestling into this house. But I never, so back to the point I was making, I never believed it was real. I don't have a memory of ever thinking it was real. It was always the sports entertainment show. And I think it's because my mum's favorite at the time was Undertaker and Kane. And if you've watched that wrestling video, he does a good job of summarizing that the Undertaker is a wizard and Kane is a demon, and they send people to hell when they beat them in a match. And sometimes they have powers like lightning and fire, and all the other wrestlers find this very scary and dangerous. So even as like a 12-year-old, by then you're like, well, this is an awesome variety show with pyrotechnics and athleticism, and choreographed dance moves that are like dangerous. And these people obviously love their art so much they're willing to like risk getting hurt. And like there was just that adrenaline is fascinating. It's like, obviously it's planned, they're going to jump off the top of this Hell in a Cell cage, but oh my god, what kind of person would do that? And they must care about this industry and this art to a degree that they're willing to put themselves through that. And I've always been fascinated by that that tension that this is an art, this is the thing people train for, this is something they love, and obviously they're fueled by the adrenaline of being in front of the crowd, being performers, and I think we can all kind of tap into that. To take a step back, and I'll also show off my shirt while we're talking about this. Is my DX shirt. Shawn Michaels Triple H, and it's also got like bums on the back. And one final, so Shawn Michaels, we're going to talk about Shawn Michaels a lot today, for the fact that Shawn is the greatest wrestler that's ever existed. He also just happens to be my favorite. I did meet Shawn Michaels once. I've seen him in person twice, and I've got his signature. For people watching the YouTube version of this, I'm holding up a bear, who is he's wearing Shawn Michaels leathers and get up. And he has his signature on his stomach. So that's one of my prized possessions, my Shawn Michaels bear.
It also has great hair, the bear.
He has excellent hair.
It's very very 80s.
So before I go on a really big spiel, I wanted to go around all of you each again and kind of unpack the stereotypes of wrestling. What if people who don't watch wrestling, what they may be averse to, like when you think of pro wrestling, what images and stereotypes come to mind, and even maybe shout the key characters at me. I want to know how literate you guys are in when you think of a wrestler. Who do you think of? I think we've already mentioned The Rock, but yeah, who comes to mind and what images come to mind?
I'm thinking of like the intros as they come down the stage, or they come down the platform, and they've got their intro music, and there's an awful lot of hype and an awful lot of drama about them coming in. And I think I recall there was two guys might be fighting, and then a third person might come in to like back up one of the fighters, and this was called like an interference or something like that. It was a big kind of disruption and stuff. It was a big hype. I also certainly when my friends were watching it, there was an awful lot of chairs being pulled out from underneath the stage, people being hit over the head with it, and I think guys getting thrown into tables and stuff like that. So there was an awful lot of the fight goes beyond the cage or goes beyond the wrestling ring and kind of spills out into more chaos than it was kind of like what people are meant to be expecting.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was my memories are more like abstract, because it was like my early memories are just like when I really feel into it, it's just like black leather. Like I just see black leather. I understood that was a thing. Hitting people with chairs. And also just now, it was like my only real exposure to wrestling was Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. And now I'm thinking back to that. I'm like, wait a minute, that was like WWE-esque stuff. And that was a real wrestling match. Like he had to defend himself. He also took the guy out. He wasn't rehearsing with them. They gave wrestling a bad name. Like what's going on there? That was just
not good representation.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a little bit of literacy with some names there, because I heard about, the Undertaker back in the day, Kane, Hulk Hogan, obviously, The Rock. Who could not know The Rock? The person who always comes to mind, though, just because he's been in it for the fucking longest, is everyone's favorite sexy leathery grandpa, Ric Flair.
Ric Flair.
And I've literally spent hours just watching Ric Flair monologues, because that man can, like, cocaine is a hell of a drug. Like it is so funny to watch that man just go off and just like one of my favorite things about wrestling, the part that I know of is like the interviews where like people will just talk, and there's this it's that same sort of tension of the interviewer just being like, well, what do you think of this? And then the wrestler will be like, oh, I'm going to crush him. I'm going to push his face right into the dirt. I'm going to make his mother cry tears of blood. Like, it's just, and the interview was like kind of semi-making it, like trying to get the mic back, but really just being like, yeah, go off. This is fine. Like, so I don't know. Whenever I think of wrestling, I just think of Ric Flair on a cocaine-fueled binge, like just yelling. And that's a great image. I really, I really
amazing. There's nostalgia associated with the era you're describing. So when it was a bit
Eras.
era, like I'm thinking of the Wild West of pro wrestling before there was any regulation on this is a workplace, so maybe we should have, procedures in place where all our performers aren't on drugs all the time.
Yeah.
So both the illicit substances and also just the roids in general, and the painkillers. Like there's a lot of really interesting stories about how many of these men were addicted to painkillers, and I'm also really fascinated. You can look up all the dark side of that stuff and how the industry had to clean up its act for the health of their performers, because this thing started happening about 20 years ago where they all started dying at the age of 40 and 50, and all these all from cardiac arrest, and it was just their bodies giving up on them because of all the abuse, both physical and substance, they had put themselves through in their early careers. So like I kind of made the morbid joke yesterday when I was doing research that I'm like, oh, is that person still alive? I Googled them. They're not, but they had made it to 65. And I'm like, that's actually a good innings for a wrestler, getting to 65. Like
Once The Rock got left.
They die young, and they started realizing this, and like a lot of unidentified concussions. So even concussion awareness in other sports has only really become, I don't know, tracked and important in the past, I want to say 20 years. Before then, concussions, they're like, he bumped his head, he was dizzy, he's fine. But now we have a greater awareness about how serious concussions are and how seriously they need to be taken. So I don't, just for the listeners out there who aren't across modern wrestling and may still have that same image of that chaos era before any regulations, modern wrestling, they now are on top of all they're regularly drug tested for all kinds of drugs. They do run it like a workplace with serious OH&S concerns. And they're really into their performers not dying anymore and trying to create longevity, so they aren't putting themselves through things that'll get them killed young. So there has been this internal shift in the industry, and even that in of itself has been really fun to watch. That wrestling has changed over time, over the decades, even as social issues change. I'm interested in like the portrayal of women because it's has a dismal record for its portrayal of women. But there's been like a resurgence to be like, how do we address this? Letting the female wrestlers shine. And I think it was, I'm going to get the wrong WrestleMania, but it was a couple of years ago, but we had the first ever main event at WrestleMania was Becky Lynch, Charlotte, and Ronda Rousey, I believe. They had a triple threat. And just the fact that we had reached a point where the main event of WrestleMania was a women's match, the most exciting, high stakes match was, but the storyline was between the three women. Like it was just really cool that they had reached that. And Becky Lynch has been just a gun. I've watched her journey from the start when she joined WWE, and I remember thinking very on that she's got something, and it was just like watching her explode. And there's a joy in that long form narrative that I'm going to tie this all back to, is that you are watching the puzzle pieces you're playing with. I guess the writers are playing with and the promoters are playing with. These are real people who are going to evolve and change over time. So by their nature, they're not static characters. So you always have to lean into, well, what's the next evolution of this character? How can they change? All right, they've beaten that. What's the next thing for them to tackle? It's why I do love comparing it to soap operas, because you have a cast of characters and technically your story can never end. And soap operas get the bad rap of, oh god, it just keeps going and it keeps escalating. Now they're pregnant, now they're dead, now they've lost their memory. And wrestling has to rely on the same tricks as well of, oh god, now they're pregnant, now they're dead. Wrestling's used all those same storylines as well. But it's because they've got to face the next thing. It's ongoing. They achieve one pinnacle, either they got to get knocked down or they got to find a new opponent who brings out a new side of that character. I guess I'll take a step back and talk a little bit about how I love wrestling as we've talked about Save the Cat on this podcast previously, and in the Save the Cat, the screenwriting advice book, he talks a lot about make it primal as a concept, and your story will resonate with an audience if you make it primal, and that means tapping into sex, violence, victory, defeat, all the things that would get cavemen excited. And I think wrestling is and that's advice for modern screenplay writing. It's like, you could be writing your crazy sci-fi, you could be writing your heady drama, fine, but find the really primal emotional beats and sell those. And I think pro wrestling is a masterclass in make it primal. It's tapped into that part of our monkey brains that is just like, this is so cool, and I need to see what happens next. So if I was to make it argue, and as writers, we may as well learn from an art that has perfected the make it primal. There's tips and tricks here for us to steal and borrow. And also at the crux of it, to say the obvious, I've mentioned comic books, but it's also just raw mythology. You have these larger than life hero figures coming up against great feats, and the same reason a Greek myth speaks to us, modern day wrestling characters will speak to us. And I like thinking of it as a shonen anime. I may have seen a YouTube video that makes this comparison as well, but the structure of a shonen anime, say your Naruto, your Dragon Ball Z's, you've got your characters, you see their training montage, they've got their little bag of super moves they use that they will shout as they use them. In the same way, our wrestling characters have named maneuvers that are given special weight. So I'm going to use Shawn Michaels as an example, has his super kick, the sweet chin music. The sweet chin music is a perfect finisher move because it can either strike out of nowhere and suddenly and end a match, or he has a really long ramp up into it where he's kind of kicking the mat, revs up the crowd, delivers it. And like a wrestler will have a finishing maneuver that 99% of the time people don't kick out of. It's what ends the match. Except on the rare few occasions it is kicked out of, and it's the biggest deal ever, that you save that for the special important moments that they kicked out of. Sweet chin music. Undertaker has his tombstone, The Rock has rock bottom, Stone Cold has the stunner. You're probably, as I'm saying this, I'm hoping you're picturing, you've seen these moves used. And why I did want to have this pro wrestling podcast is more and more I'm watching Marvel movies and all fight scenes are just pro wrestling. To the point it kind of starts to annoy me in that they're using DDTs, they're using hurricanranas, they're using drop kicks, and I'm like, this is just a filmed wrestling match. The modern stunts of fight choreography are now just borrowing from pro wrestling. That they've already perfected this stylish fight choreo. So the second half of this podcast, I do want to go into how to write a fight scene based on pro wrestling, kind of the structure of a match. There might be something our listeners might be able to get out of that as well. Before I barrel on, any thoughts or questions from the round table here?
I've got none. It's fascinating.
Okay, cool.
No, lead on.
It is just like well, as soon as I realized it was, when I watched Wrestling Isn't Wrestling, it was like when I realized that, like, yeah, it's not trying to claim to be real, and because of that it can lean into these awesome fictional tools. Then it does just hit like any shonen anime. Like, I do think of Dragon Ball Z, and it's like, I love what goes behind, like, if you're gonna set up a fight, like obviously, like, the actual strength a character has and the weight behind someone's punch needs to come from narrative, and it needs to come from, like, narrative weight. Why should the audience care about this punch? Why is this? So you have to build significance, like by giving someone an unbreakable move and then using it over so much time, and then finally taking that out, like subverting it, gives the audience an amazing thrill. It has so much weight behind it. So it's a lot of like, you take your time to build something up. You know, it takes a long time for Goku to arrive for a reason. It builds all this weight when finally he's shrugging off all these punches. It's because you need to set up that tension with the audience so that when Goku's punches break the world, it's not just like, well, yeah, you could put, any writer can write a punch breaks the world. Like, that's not anything. But like, why does that feel satisfying? And you have to build that satisfaction for the audience, and you have to get them on board. And it's cool.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the Frieza saga specifically.
Same. Yeah.
Just as a very slight digression here. Apparently, that went on for as long as it did because they literally had not written the manga yet.
They were waiting for the manga.
Oh my gosh.
In the same way, though, something I find really fascinating, and again, that wrestling isn't wrestling video really clarifies this. I think I had some idea of it, but it is just a really good secondary source and pretty much the only one I will refer to today. But that tension between the narrative and the meta narrative of wrestling, like you said, Ali, these are real people, and they do have traits and qualities that need to be tapped into. And as soon as you realize it's like, okay, this is functionally a balletic performance that is done every week on the fly. And you know, people do legitimately get hurt because it is so athletic. It brings a total new weight to it. And it's, and then also it's interesting to see how, like, because the first thing I think is like, well, do the performers get any say in this? And it's like, well, mostly this is pre-written, but there will be some aspects that they might, you know, workshop into it. And just that tension between what is real and what is sort of scripted is just, it's a fascinating thing for me, I think.
Yeah. All right. No, that's a perfect segue, because I do want to, before I go into the structure, talk a little bit about kayfabe. And if listeners out there don't know what kayfabe is. So when I'm using the word kayfabe, do the three of you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Got head shakes. You might have an inkling, Alex. I think you have you heard the word kayfabe as a term?
No. It might come back to me when you bring it up, and I might recognize it.
All right, cool.
Does it stand for?
I love wrestling culture.
Does it stand for kinetic fables? And it's how someone can hit someone with a chair.
It should now.
And they're fine.
It should.
Okay.
So wrestling has a lot of its own language, almost like carny lingo, because that's kind of the origins of pro wrestling, where they were carnies that traveled around the side shows of traveling shows. So you had the strongman, you had the freak show, and then you had the wrestling. So that all this carny language is just embedded in the behind the scenes, and I adore it.
Wow.
Kayfabe's one of these words. Kayfabe. For context, I feel like if a wrestler listened to this, they're like, who's this woman talking like she has authority? I'm not a wrestler, but I've been in and around it. I have wrestling friends, and I just more think of myself as a lifelong fan academic from the outside. So I may get some things wrong, but I am primarily talking to the people who have no idea, and I'm introducing these things for the first time. So kayfabe is the lie. Kayfabe is wrestling is real. So you use it in a sense of, did he really hit him? Oh no, that's kayfabe that they did that. Or you gotta keep up the kayfabe. If you're in character and you're a heel character, you're the bad guy, and you're out in public and you decide to be a dick to a child, that's you maintaining kayfabe.
Wow.
And then when you strategically choose to break kayfabe, is also a really cool tool these days. So when we're talking about the Hulk Hogan, early Ric Flair era, kayfabe was strong. They were still, in a sense, selling wrestling as real. They would keep the heels and the baby faces in separate locker rooms, because these people can't be seen being friends out of work, because that would break kayfabe. And it just, if they were asked about their art, they had to talk about it in competitive terms. I'm a wrestler. I go out and compete. I don't know if I'm going to win this match. I've won the match. So that's keeping the kayfabe alive. You start seeing maybe around the Attitude Era, or just the cusp of the Attitude Era. So the late 90s, the internet's now a thing. Wrestling's going quite international. The WWF has bought up all the territories and is becoming the company. And with that, a more intelligent fan base is cottoning onto what's happening, and it's no longer going to fly in this era that wrestling is real. Like, everyone's wised up to it. So kayfabe itself had to evolve in this era. That it was kind of left aside, that we're no longer going to pretend that wrestling's real. That's not worth our energy. But this fun meta thing starts to evolve, where the fans would speculate at, well, who genuinely doesn't like each other? Because these stories do get out. In the locker room, that person genuinely thinks that person's a dick, and they don't work well together. That's a true fact. The fans, being obsessive, get wind of this, and they go, wouldn't it be exciting if that person who genuinely doesn't like that person were then forced to work to each other? And imagine if that guy who hates that guy had to put him over, which is to let him win. He would be really angry about that. So it's kind of that speculation of their genuine emotions. Vince McMahon, that might be a familiar name to all of you. He is essentially the owner, chairman, head promoter of what was WWF at the time. He had bought up all the territories, and he started to cotton on to this idea that, well, if that's what the fans want, they want to see this guy who genuinely hates that guy in the ring, he's going to make them work together. And it's feeding into that speculation of, oh, well, God, that shot was delivered really stiffly. Was that a real, like, was that a shoot, or was that kayfabe? So suddenly the fans are watching it, no longer sure what's real heat between the wrestlers. Do they genuinely hate each other? Is it a work? And so this is this new modern concept of kayfabe that I love, where they're always leaning into, well, is it real or is it story? So there's just a more intelligent evolution of kayfabe. It's like, yes, it's real, but we keep using real life things to base the storylines off. I can give a couple of examples. Infamously, there's the Edge and Matt Hardy storyline, where Matt and his girlfriend Lita at the time were an on-screen couple, and then there was the real life affair between Edge and Lita. And that was like a proper thing. They had a real fight backstage, and all the fans hear about this. They're like, oh my God, Edge and Matt got into a real fight. And then Vince McMahon goes, that smells like money. So then one of the greatest like rivalries is the Edge and Matt Hardy storyline. They were professional enough to go, all right, we're going to work in the ring with each other, even though we hate each other, and we're going to make lots and lots of money out of beating the hell out of each other.
That's crazy.
Soon these wrestlers are gonna have to make those little trinkets from Inception. Like, this is getting a bit much. They're gonna have to be like, spin the top, be like, is this kayfabe? I don't even know anymore. Like, this is too meta.
That's crazy.
I adore it. And the other, say, fun story way they manipulate this is, so Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. So Stephanie McMahon is the daughter of Vince, the daughter of the boss, and she and Triple H were married. But it wasn't kayfabe to acknowledge they were married. So even though all the fans knew, they're like, isn't it funny that Triple H is married to Stephanie McMahon? It had never really been, like, their initial relationship was storyline. But by the time they were older and they were actually married, had kids, it like wasn't storyline, wasn't acknowledged that they were married. Even though everyone in the fan base knew they were married. So, you know, people would accuse Triple H of getting like special treatment. They're like, oh, they always put the belt on Triple H just because he's married to the boss's daughter. All this stuff. Elegantly, they were setting up for a Randy Orton Triple H feud. And they did it out of nowhere, where Stephanie kind of had an on-screen persona. I think she was like the commissioner, or she was the general manager of Raw. So she would come out, she would announce matches. She was doing this. One day, Randy Orton comes and attacks her. So Stephanie's taken some like shots like throughout her career. It's nothing new to see Stephanie getting beaten up on screen. We're used to this as an audience. Randy Orton takes out Stephanie McMahon, and then Triple H is there suddenly, like out of the crowd, beating the shit out of Randy Orton. And if, say, you had none of the meta knowledge, you wouldn't know what's going on. Why is Triple H there? Like, no entrance music. Why is he beating the shit out of Randy? Like, there was no actual narrative build up to this moment. The only way that moment makes sense is if you've been in the community long enough and you know Stephanie and Triple H are married. And then for Randy to suddenly attack her, and then Triple H to attack him, and then you're like, what is happening? Oh my God. So that they're playing with this. Is it real? Isn't it real?
I got caught in
energy.
the kayfabe just from your story, because like you were talking about them actually being married, they have kids, and then obviously the part where she gets beaten up, that's, you know, a fake fight and stuff. It's not actually happening. But when you said that, I took it as the climax of a real thing. Like, well, they're actually married. So you said that, and that was my legitimate response of, whoa, like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh wait, that part's not real. They are married, but he did not actually beat her up. Wow.
Yeah. So, and then there was this wonderful feud between Triple H and Randy Orton that came out of this nowhere. He just attacked Stephanie like for other reasons, but then and Triple H is like, why are you beating up my wife? Obviously. But it never been acknowledged that they were married until that moment. And then they became an on-screen couple after that, even though they had been married for years. So I adore that dance they play. So that's not necessarily useful to us as fiction writers. Like, we don't have a meta narrative to play with per se. But I find it fascinating regardless, and it's an excellent reason to study like the art of wrestling and what they're doing in that space with storytelling.
It reminds me a lot, like, I've never really been a big reality TV watcher. Like, I used to watch Big Brother back in the day just because it was on Channel 10. But recently, me and my girlfriend have started watching this, and I think I've told you this. We started watching this show because I'm a little bit of an autist about boats and trains, incidentally, but that's a different story. This show called Below Deck, which is basically this it's about like mega yachts, like luxury mega yachts, and the crews that work underneath them. And you watch this show, and like kind of the most fun thing is to pick out, okay, well, what of this happened? And it, like, let me try and break it down. So you got the show, right? And the show is done on this very strict time budget because the cruises are very expensive to run. It goes for about 30 days, or 20 days, I think. And then, so there's that, you watch it. And the most fun thing about it is to pick out, okay, well, what happened and what did they show and what storyline did they pursue and which storyline was not pursued. And then the most fun thing is at the end, you get this breakdown where all the cast members come out and have this, like, basically duke it out in real time and be like, well, you did this, but you did this. Oh, this is the footage you didn't see. And then they show something else and you're like, oh shit, this, you know. So it's this, like, the most fun that I have is, aside from the drama is just ridiculous, just because, like, people working in close quarters for, you know, extended periods of time. Some of these people hate each other. But the most fun thing for me is that meta narrative of, like, oh wow, okay, well, the plot line was actually this the whole time when they were making us believe this. So it very much reminds me of that evolution of kayfabe, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For me, it reminded me, it's because you said, like, that doesn't so much help us as writers because we don't have that meta aspect. But then I thought of, like, I don't know, like stories that go really big and have a following under them, where you have people speculating on Reddit boards and things like that. And obviously the authors can read these speculations, and sometimes it's like, oh snap, that's a good idea. And sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where they feed into the meta and it actually shapes the story itself. I was just like,
yeah.
That was really it. It was just meta weaving into narrative sometimes.
That's like fan service in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah, true.
You know, you're going like, well, this is what you guys want. Let's give you some more of this, and then you know, there's the backlash, and you can play with that. But
And
yeah,
wrestling has to be incredibly like
Quick
finger on
turnaround,
the
yeah.
pulse, because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
crowd reaction, the pops each week will decide what they decide to do next week.
Wow.
Like they have months mapped out loosely, but say if an idea doesn't fly, they're going to drop it immediately. They're not going to be like, oh, we'll just stick with it. You'll love it. They're very receptive to that character's choice there. Didn't get the reaction we thought it would, so we're going to change it. I'm trying the Stone Cold turning heel example in the Attitude Era gets thrown around a lot, and that Stone Cold was so big. He was just he came at the perfect moment of, he was this working class voice that was just all middle fingers in the face of authority, represented by Vince McMahon, and he just resonated so strongly that they couldn't break it. They tried to do a thing with his character where Stone Cold's like, cool, what's the next evolution of my character? And the answer is usually it's time to turn heel. It's you go from babyface, you become the bad guy. They tried to do that with Stone Cold, and the fans were just kind of felt a little confused, betrayed, but not in the good way. They had this language around like heat, and then like the good heat and the bad heat. So good heat is when a crowd hates a heel in the way they should and want to see them punished, and that's going to drive ticket sales to the big main event. But then there's just this guy annoys me, I don't want him on my TV screen, or this is dumb. Like, so it's the two different kinds of like hate and heat. And with Stone Cold, his heel turn, everyone's just like, we don't buy it. We just like you'd hear the glass shatter of his entrance music and people still go, woo, Stone Cold. And then Stone Cold comes out and calls everyone idiots, and they're all like, oh, but we like you, Stone Cold. Like it just wasn't working.
Really
so
funny.
they gave it like 6 months, and then they dropped it, and Stone Cold had to become a face again, just by the sheer will of the audience. A very similar thing happened in Becky Lynch's rise to popularity, and they were trying to make her a heel, and the crowd's like, we want to cheer Becky, we love Becky, she's kicking up. Like, it's a similar Stone Cold thing in that she's doing heel like actions, and that she's acting like a bad person, an anti-hero, but people want to cheer her. But they kept putting her up against like good, like the babyface wrestlers, and she should be like beating them up, and people are like, we're not enjoying watching this.
Sorry, Ali, can we clarify those terms, because I don't know that everyone is necessarily
sure.
understands
I've launched into using them before defining them. So I'm using heel as villain, and I'm using babyface as hero. And it's funny that I've watched these terms make their way into some writer's room. I had a script editor of mine be like, oh, this person's a heel. And I'm like, we're talking about wrestling. And she's like, what? No, I'm like, that's a wrestling term. Heel's a wrestling term. And she's like, I just know it as, it means villain. And I'm like, yeah, from wrestling. Let's acknowledge the roots of the culture, please. Yeah, so babyface is the good guys, heel, and so you have a heel turn and you have a face turn, and that just means to go from one archetype to the other archetype.
And those, I imagine, have to be done at actually, yeah, you might be able to speak on this. Like,
yeah,
I imagine those flips have to be done at what's the word? They have to be done at specific points, like expected points or unexpected points to make a bit of a what's the word? I'm losing my vocabulary. You know, to break the trope, essentially, to flip it on its head and be like, oh, this is cool.
No, it's the art of the heel turn. So fans will roll their eyes a little bit at an overdone heel turn. Big Show comes to mind as a character where it's like, is he a good guy now? Is he a bad guy now? Like, they just flipped him too quickly, too easily, just wherever the narrative needed him to be, and people got a bit sick of it. But the art of the precise, well-used heel turn at the right moment to get like the good betrayal, anger, the good heat from a crowd to be like, I can't believe you've done that. You are now the person I hate most in the world. And we will justify months of storyline in the lead up to seeing you get your comeuppance. Like those good heel turns are the bread and butter of the industry. I'm thinking of, again, I'm going to go back to Shawn constantly. Shawn was part of a tag team known as the Rockers. It was Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. They were best friends. They were baby faces. Everyone loved them. And then infamously, there's a behind the scenes segment where they're being interviewed. And then Shawn super kicks Marty Jannetty through like a pane glass window.
Why?
And it just came out of nowhere because Shawn's like, you're dead weight. I don't need you anymore. I guess it's the character justification. He's like, I'm going solo. I'm not going to be a tag team anymore.
Okay.
And everyone was just like, it was so shocking at the time. Just this out of nowhere heel. And then Shawn is now number one heel. And it sets up the perfect like betrayal of friendship, Martin Jannetty versus Shawn Michaels for the next couple of months. Just beautiful. The other famous one, you may have seen this image in popular culture, the NWO. It's Kevin Nash, it's Scott Hall, and it's Hulk Hogan. It's Hulk Hogan during his heel era. So it was just, it would never really been done before to take someone like Hulk Hogan, who represents everything you think he represents. The take your vitamins, drink your milk, be strong, all American, just the hero of popular culture. He's that era. It's now the Attitude Era. What can be done with the Hulk Hogan character? And they decide to turn him heel for the first time ever, and he joins NWO, and it just blows the fans' mind. And Hollywood Hogan worked really well. Like, Hogan actually pulled it off. He was a great heel. Everyone hated him for it. It was just mwah. It was the long-running joke for John Cena's career, where everyone's like, are they ever going to turn John Cena heel? They never really did. In the end, John Cena remained untouchable superhero John Cena. But the fans are always like, what if they did one day? what if John Cena goes heel? Currently, I'll use one last example, sorry. Roman Reigns, as we're heading into WrestleMania next weekend, the main event is Roman Reigns versus Cody Rhodes. Roman Reigns was famous for many, many years being a forced babyface, in that they wanted him to be the guy everyone loved and cheered, but he was just never quite over with the fans. The fans were like, he's a bit bland. We don't like him. But if he went heel, that could be cool. And they played silly buggers for a long time about, are we going to turn him heel? Are we going to turn him heel? They finally did. And he's been the most amazing heel. The storyline they're running with him as heel has been some of the best writing in modern wrestling history. So I'm very excited for the Cody Rhodes Roman Reigns culmination of that story next weekend, just because they've done that, the art of a good heel turn. I did want to spend a bit more time talking about how wrestling is almost an industry built on good villains, because I feel like modern Marvel movies, and even in our own writing, we put a lot of emphasis on the hero's journey, the protagonist, and the villains are secondary. And I find pro wrestling fascinating because pro wrestling is almost villains first, heel first. You've got to get the heel right. You don't have a good conflict, and you don't have a satisfying climax and resolution if your heel doesn't work. You can cheer your hero all you want. Great, you've got John Cena. All the kids love John Cena. They're going to pay money to watch John Cena. They're going to pay money to watch The Rock do whatever. Great. But who can you pair that against for an interesting dynamic that's going to make a fantastic, just who's going to bring out a different side of the hero, push their buttons, and actually be a threat to taking the belt off them? Who's going to put them through a genuine trial? And it's the make it primal. Who do we want to see either be punished for their misdeeds? Because the only way a conflict can resolve in wrestling is it's got to reach a point where words no longer work. And again, it's going to happen, but it's like, this is a conflict that can't be solved with words. We've got to push it to a point where we're so invested and pent up, where we're like, words are off the table. Negotiations aren't going to solve this conflict. The only way this conflict can have a satisfying narrative is if it turns violent and someone is physically punished for what they've done. And so you've got to push the buttons to reach that point, and you need a heel that deserves to receive that punishment. and I adore that as a storytelling tool.
Is it because I know a recent trend in superhero movies, or it seems like well, yeah, because like initially, like a lot of, it sounds like with wrestling there was a lot of propaganda in the villains. Like it was like more like nationality based, and nationalism was played a bigger role and stuff.
Yes.
And then as we've progressed, like especially more recently, people get really interested in like, I even saw a video kind of making fun of this a little bit, like how Hollywood currently writes villains. And it's like just this person giving all these reasons why someone, like they did something terrible, but look at all these reasons that make you wonder if they're actually a good person. And we're dipping more into this gray area villain where it's like, ooh, like they've done a bad thing, but like, can I fault them because they've done all this? I'm curious to know if that's starting to seep into wrestling, where their heels are now more of these gray area heels, where it's not pure just like, ooh, they're evil. Is that becoming a trend in wrestling as well?
There's sophisticated characters, and the example I will use is the Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker match at 2025 at WrestleMania.
Oh, it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, it's a while away, but
Ellie,
tune
the
in.
audience isn't ready to know about your site. We need to...
Ixnay on the script.
Yeah, no.
But I'm almost of the opinion that it still works best when it is quite black and white, because we are driving towards this primal end goal of either this clash of ideas. One idea needs to defeat the other idea, or this person needs to be defeated by this person. And the more almost the more ideas you add onto it muddies that a little bit. We're looking for a very distilled final beat of this story, but that's not to say they haven't done that. Heel versus heel matches, I think, with complex heels work better than babyface versus babyface matches. It's kind of infamous that hero versus hero matches don't work well. The crowd in the heat of the moment doesn't know who to go for, and you get a quiet crowd. And no one likes that energy. Almost the more simpler you can keep the script, the crowd knows their job, and they know who they're cheering for. I'm going to use Undertaker and Shawn as an example, because how they set that up is Undertaker's never been defeated at WrestleMania. He was 16-0 at the time. Shawn Michaels is getting towards the end of his career. He doesn't really have anything left to prove. He's literally known as Mr. WrestleMania, the greatest wrestler. But he's like, I've never defeated Undertaker at WrestleMania. I want that notch on my resume. What a great way for me to like top off my career by doing this. He's like, I need a challenge because I've done everything, but I haven't done this. And Undertaker obviously has this demon from hell persona, and Shawn, which leaning into the meta narrative, everyone knows he's like a Christian in real life, and that was kind of what saved him from his addiction. So that's the real story of Shawn. He then leans into this persona where he's now wearing Undertaker's trench coat and hat, but he's wearing a white version of it. He has like this heavens symbology going on.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, so you got Undertaker all in black, Shawn's all in white. At WrestleMania, he descends from the rafters while Undertaker comes up for his. Well, like it's this beautiful clash of heaven and hell, except Shawn is technically the heel in this clash. So we want to cheer for Undertaker because at the end of the day, we don't want the streak broken. The streak is too important to wrestling as a concept, Undertaker's career. The streak can't be defeated. Undertaker's a good guy. He's always been the hero at WrestleMania. Shawn Michaels is the challenger. He's trying to break the streak. He's the bad guy. We love Shawn. He's the Christian. He wants to defeat the demon is his rhetoric, but he's going to be positioned as he's technically the heel. So I've gone into this match being like, I love Shawn, but we can't lose the streak. The streak's too important. And so it's the closest you're going to get to a face versus face, but they still need to position Shawn as the heel, the challenger, so the crowd knows who they're going to go for. Even if we love Shawn, it's going to be satisfying when he loses and fails to beat the streak. that's a good segue into, because we're reaching the end of the podcast. I will talk about the 7 stages of a wrestling match. So if
I
you
can
guys
jump in just before that, not to
Yeah.
make us go too far over time. There's an interesting, like, listen to you talk about the heel and the baby face and the kayfabe. There's like a little bit of an element of that in like the UFC, because even though it's a competition, they're kind of building stars. And if you're
Yep.
a good fighter with a star quality, they'll kind of arrange. I feel like they do arrange fights to kind of allow guys to have a trajectory.
Yeah.
Obviously, when fights get set up, there's a lot of trash talking, and that's to develop a sense of rivalry and hype. And if someone is coming up through the ranks of a weight class and there's a specific champion, they're going to start calling that person out early on. So you can have these rivalries that start to go on for maybe a year. There can also be guys who like don't like each other. But one of the best kind of heel babyface storylines, this was a rivalry that went on for years and years, was John Jones and Daniel Cormier. If anybody recognizes those names. John Jones, I may not remember exactly who was who at the time, but I think John Jones was the champion. Daniel Cormier was like up and coming. And John Jones was the babyface. He was very respectful, really, really good fighter. He had a great like reputation and a good kind of brand image. And him and Daniel Cormier seemed to have like a genuine rivalry, but there seemed to be more stuff going on behind the scenes that people were hearing about but didn't know what was going on. And then when they came to do their face-off before their fight, it broke up into a real fight, and Daniel Cormier and getting knocked down, and the signposts all got knocked down. This was kind of before the UFC had done anything like that. Whoa. So they had this very famous, I think, CNN interview immediately after this. It was about 5 minutes where they're asking them about the rivalry, and they're asking them about where does this come from. And Daniel Cormier is saying how John Jones is very disrespectful and he's rude and he's this and that. And John Jones is like, well, look, I think we're just professionals. I'm very ashamed of what happened. We're here to promote a fight, and there could be a little bit of trash talk and things get heated. I think that he's misinterpreted some things I've done, and I'm sorry about that. But, at the end of the day, we're professionals. And Daniel Cormier is like, you're so fake, man. You're so fake. And Daniel Cormier is really coming off as the heel. They have their fight. John Jones wins. And people are talking about, will there be another fight? And in the space between the next fight getting set up, John Jones crashes his car into a pregnant woman's car while high on cocaine and flees the scene, then returns to the scene because he'd left like 30 grand in the car.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So he goes to jail for this. And
as you do.
When he,
because this is
in
not
the meantime, this is not kayfabe, this is real. Daniel Cormier then becomes the champion in the meantime. And John Jones gets out and he's saying, well, you beat everyone in the division except me. I'm still your biggest challenge. But now John Jones is the heel.
Yeah, right.
And CNN released they released the rest of the footage from like the live camera of that infamous interview.
Jesus.
Because the camera had been rolling for about 3 or 4 minutes before they went live, and had been rolling for a few minutes after they went live. And the two guys are sitting in separate rooms, mic'd up, and John Jones is just sitting there staring off into the corner, and he knows Daniel Cormier can hear him, and he's just like, you there, pussy? Can you hear me? I kicked your ass just now. I kicked your ass. And he is just threatening him and threatening him and threatening him. And then when they step into the interview, like a switch goes, he just turns into like a different person, and he's there, he's being friendly and he's chatting and he's being respectful.
Manipulated the narrative.
100%, 100%.
That's crazy.
Interview ends and he switches back into, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you in this fight. It was crazy. And then they released it and everyone's seen this. And John Jones has just been like the ultimate heel after that. Like he's just a psychopath. Absolute brilliant.
That's crazy because that's creating kayfabe, but based off of like letting the people be themselves and then selectively withholding information to control the arc they're trying to create.
The symbiotic relationship between, like, say, UFC and WWE is fascinating, because I've seen UFC use WWE's narrative tricks and kind of sneaky ways of building up fight hype. And then at the same time, wrestling loves to, say, invite Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey back and turn them into professional wrestlers, but they will lean on their reputation as real fighters for their stories. So spoilers, I was talking about Undertaker's undefeated streak. Guess who they had finally defeat Undertaker's undefeated streak a couple of years back? It was Brock Lesnar. And the reason they gave it, still think it's the worst decision they ever made in the history of wrestling. But obviously the thinking behind giving it to Brock Lesnar is Brock Lesnar can genuinely beat the shit out of you. No one can actually beat Brock Lesnar. So that's why he was on. Yeah, the man is unstoppable. So that they're leaning on his UFC reputation. Was it MMA? I can't remember. And his real world fighting reputation to justify in story why they finally beat the streak.
Defeating Magic.
Yeah, but why he beat the undead demon, the Undertaker.
That's very funny. Very cool.
So, but just to wrap up, a glimpse at the story structure of an actual match. So if you are having a little bit of fun with fight choreo, this is the lingo and how a match is set up. And I love it as a structure tool, because in the same way that once you know the structure, in the way we have story structure and we have tropes, these wrestlers in real time are playing with these expectations. So as an audience, if you're literate, you've watched this match unfold again and again, and you know how it's going to go. So as a wrestler working at like the top of your game, you're upending expectations. You're like, the audience will now expect this to happen. I will do something unexpected. So those are the tools that it's the same tools we're using as writers. That's why I love it. So I'll just read this out kind of word for word what this is. Stage 1 is the intro. It is simple. Establish to the crowd your role in the match. Are you the bad guy? Bad guys mouth off to the crowd, or they refuse to shake hands. If you're the good guy, you give the crowd a thumbs up. You shake the ref's hand. So it's very simple. Even if you don't have a reputation yet, you're going to do good guy things. You're going to do bad guy things. So you know. The crowd wants to be told how to react, and you tell them. So the crowd's ready. They know their script, but they got to know what noise they're making for who. It's kind of part of the intrinsic contract. All right, the shine. This is the initial struggle where the chain, so a lot of like grappling and technical wrestling is put into the shine. So if you sit down and watch a match, this is where they're going to do a lot of quick holds. All the holds that actually look like, you know, wrestling, the wrestling Phoenix saw in high school, the wrestling teams. So they will do all this during the shine. You get to see that they're both trained and they're talented, and you get to see the face like in his element. You're like, the face knows how to wrestle. Great. We love it. This it actually says here, if you're going face v face in quotation marks, good luck. So that's a nod to kind of how difficult it is to set up a face v face match. Because it's like, then you need to get over both of your technical prowesses. But if you're face v heel, you only have to worry about putting time into getting the face over. You don't need to show that the heel's got technical prowess. We don't care. We hate him. All right. In a classic heel versus face match, you establish that in a fair fight, the good guy is the better wrestler and would win. All right. Now, I love this because what it's setting up is what we talked about at the start, James, where you associate wrestling with interference. Phoenix associating it with steel chairs. We established that in a fair fight, the good guy wins. Therefore, the logic of wrestling, the only way a bad guy ever wins is if he's cheating, if it's not fair, if someone's interfering or a weapon is being used, is the only way a bad guy will ever beat a good guy. It is not true of the wrestling world that a bad guy cleanly beats a good guy. That's just not the rules of this universe, and I kind of adore that. So that's why there's so much nonsense, because that's how a bad guy's got to win, because you can't make a face look weak ever. All right, we're in stage 3. Stage 3 is called the heat. This is where one guy establishes that usually the bad guy will establish they're willing to do anything to win. The bad guy may rake the eyes or choke his opponent on the ropes, or he might argue with the ref, or there might be just some small distraction. This should be slow and methodical. Any explosive moves should happen at the beginning of the heat and be kept to a minimum as the bad guy plays with his food. And then this is kind of when you should start revving up the crowd by this point. So if you watch one wrestling match in your life, go away and watch Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 25, and you'll be able to watch this. I could always picture it in my head, the shine, all grappling, and then the heat. We know by this point in the match, Shawn is the heel because he's starting to look desperate. So his character stuff is he's starting to panic and realize he can't beat the Undertaker. The Undertaker is a technically proficient wrestler. He may not have it in it, but he can't lose this. He's like bet his entire career onto this. It's so important to him that he breaks the streak. So he's kind of got Undertaker up against the ropes, and he will, in wrestling, you have to the count of 5 to like not push them on the ropes anymore. And that's just a little tool to be like, oh, that's Sean's pushing it all the way to count of 5. That's not a good guy thing. A bad guy only, bends the rules that much to the count of 5. So you start seeding in that Sean's the desperate one, and he's going to break some rules here. All right. Stage 4, the comeback. The heel has the hold locked in, yells at the crowd that the hero is going to tap. So tapping is submission. And that's when the face starts to slowly get to his feet and break the hold. Again, Shawn versus Undertaker. Shawn had Undertaker in a hold, and it was a big deal because no one gets the Undertaker in a hold. But the Undertaker, and he also, Undertaker is famous for he doesn't submit. But it just seeds in this doubt of like, oh shit, is Shawn going to be the one to make Undertaker submit? We're going to break the streak via submission? Oh my God. So Shawn has him in a hold. Will he tap? And usually if you are a bad guy, you're taunting the crowd. You're like, I've got him in a hold. He's going to tap. He can't break out of this. But it's the comeback. So the hero starts to reach either for the rope to break the hold. He's going to lift him up and he's going to break it. It's going to be great. But it's only about 30 seconds long. It's not too, you want the crowd cheering, but you don't want to blow all your cookies just yet. We're starting to see some bigger moves now. There might be a couple of clotheslines, couple of drop kicks, maybe a bit of a springboard, a close count. But at the end of this, the heel should then be back on top. We reach stage 5 called the Big Heat. This is where the heel pulls out all the stops, the heavy hitting moves, the explosive moves, the devastating holds, the stomp to the head, the fingers. He's mad and embarrassed and ready to win. And I will diverge that I love heels because they're the opportunity for 1, comedy, and 2, cowardice. So again, with the idea that you can never make a baby face truly look weak. They're not usually the comedy characters, and they can never be cowards, but a heel can be a coward. A heel can be funny. And there's room for this, not only in the narrative, but like in the story structure itself. It's funny watching a heel start to panic, start to sweat, or to make some cowardly moves and be scared of the baby face. You're starting to get all this woven into it. After about several minutes, include plenty of pinfall attempt. The heel has seen the face come back from his cheating and isn't taking any more chances. After yet another attempt at the win, only to be foiled by the face's perseverance, the heel goes for a desperate submission or a big move off the top. That's when it's time for stage 6, the big comeback. This is Hogan's Hulk Up, Cena's You Can't See Me, The Rock's Spinebuster. The heel has missed a big move. So usually the heel fucks themselves over, like all good narratives. Intrinsically, the heel's failure was within them all along. So the heel makes a mistake, crucial mistake. Both guys are down. The crowd should be excited for the face to have the opportunity now. This is about as long as the first comeback and is even more explosive. Stage 7, the finish. The finish can be simple or complicated. It's either just hitting your finish and a pin, or it's a big dirty roll up by the heel and or a run in a DQ. So again, I love how it's being like, if the heels win, this is when you have an interference because he can't win clean, or this is the clean win by the babyface. Takes place after the big combat. If the crowd is hot from a good guy hitting their comeback, they'll pop even bigger when he wins. So pop is the word, the industry term for when a crowd goes nuts, a big pop. But they'll be even more devastated when he loses. So yeah, just as a fun aside, I've seen some of the wrestlers out of kayfabe use the word pop on Twitter. So like one of them will make a joke and the other one will tweet back, pop. Like, let's just talk to each other. Adore it. So in conclusion, that's a very basic fight structure you can use. The 7 stages of a wrestling match. It's so good. It's your bread and butter. And now if you go away and watch wrestling, you will see these beats. You will see that how important the heel is to the success of the fight.
I took notes. while you were saying that. I'm like, I just want to write this down. This is a very good structure to know. And then, you learn the structure, and then you could find out how you can subvert it, how you can twist it, how you can break it.
Yes.
Based on the characters you have set up on either side. If you do have good guy versus good guy, or anti-hero versus anti-hero, or like good guy, or your villain is a gentleman villain in the sense that they're doing terrible things but have that like odd code that they live by. Like
Yes.
James, you mentioned, what's it called? Where you have it's like in Vietnam or something, and you have the police officers trying to invade the building, and you have I remember you talking about this movie, and I love this movie, but I can't remember what it's called. It's like, do you remember this?
The Raid?
The Raid,
the
yeah.
Middle Eastern movie?
You have the one villain who's the Mad Dog, and he's just looking for that fight that pushes him to his limit. So anytime he corners a person, there's this odd silence where he lets them get up, lets them get themselves ready and into their prime fighting position. He
puts his gun down.
He puts his gun down. He wants the fight, the true fight. And because of that sense of honor, there's this weird sense of respect. Like, he has a higher power that he honors, which is the fight. And because of that, the fight structure works differently, because in a sense, like the audience has something where they're like, I respect you. I hate you. I want you to lose, but I do respect the fact that you respect something. So that fight has to work a little differently, as opposed to the cowardly cheater who like has people hold people down and stuff like that. Things like that.
Yeah, no.
Also terrifying, because he basically says, "This is what I do. I'm going to beat you to death." It's like, okay, we're not taking any prisoners here.
Yeah.
As a subversion, it's making me think of Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair at WrestleMania 24, which is Ric Flair's retirement match. And it was billed as, I think Vince McMahon's like, you're getting old, Ric Flair. Either you beat Shawn Michaels and you can stay, or if he beats you, you got to lose. And it is this wonderful like mentor dynamic they have going on, where Shawn doesn't want to retire his hero. Who wants to retire Ric Flair, the Ric Flair who's been around forever? And it's just emotionally charged. Again, that technically Shawn is the villain. He's the heel of this match. He's got to defeat Ric Flair and end his career. But no one wants Ric Flair to lose. Everyone's like fucking crying. You go and watch that match. The crowd's in tears. Shawn's in tears. It's all real emotions because it's Ric Flair's final match. And yet he's got to hit him with the super kick and defeat him. I even just saw a meme going around the other day where it's just, like it was My Heart Will Go On is playing in the background to this final moment where Shawn super kicks Ric Flair, because it's just the meme of the crowd being like, we were all crying that day. So check out that one for a subversion of the heel hero dynamic. And again, just thinking of Undertaker and Shawn, that moment there where it says the villain makes a mistake and lets the hero get the upper hand for their big comeback. I can think of the exact moment in the WrestleMania 25 match where Shawn takes a big leap from the top of the ring to the outside. He misses. It's his traditional elbow drop, and he just plants straight on the ground. You're like, oh God, Shawn, he's old. Why is he doing this? He's broken a rib. Then Undertaker goes to start his comeback, but Undertaker does, and so if it was a traditional match structure, Undertaker would successfully do this leap over, hit Shawn, the momentum will start kicking off, but Undertaker does this massive leap and he lands on his fucking head. It's like, it's a disaster. The move is actually a disaster in the moment, but it was planned that he would miss it, but it looks real bad. And so as fans, you're just like, they're all genuinely hurt. Who's gonna win? What's happening? Oh God, Undertaker was meant to hit that, he missed it, and it just keeps you off balance the whole time. It's so well done. So suddenly that's when they start messing with the structure, those two, because they're geniuses who have been at it for decades. Anyway, if I haven't sold you on pro wrestling, that's a shame. If nothing else, go and watch the one match I keep talking about, and go and steal some long form tricks about how you can keep a character evolving over time, steal some fight choreo tricks. And at the end of the day, I do want to talk, like, I just want to make sure you leave with the idea that the foil to your hero is probably one of the most important tools you'll ever possibly write. As all of wrestling talks about, Stone Cold was only successful as a babyface because Vince McMahon was his foil. This idea of he wasn't even a wrestler. He was just the boss of the company. He was the authority that Stone Cold had to rally against as the voice of the working class. So your hero can only be as strong as your hero is my final wisdoms for this podcast. Any final thoughts from the crew before I end with a quote?
Great breakdown of like the fight scene and how that works. I'm definitely going to watch a few of those and take some notes for writing. But it seems like, I don't know what it is. It seems like it has the texture of like, yeah, that would like be engaging and that would get you behind it. Like,
yeah, I definitely want to watch the WrestleMania come out. That's for sure. Got binge, so we can do it.
All right. I have 3 quick quotes that for me I found quite funny, but sort of encapsulates some of this primal stuff we were talking about. Make it primal, make your action primal. You're going to tap into your audience wanting to care. And at the end of the day, it's whipping your crowd into a frenzy that they need to see how this ends. And that's just great story fodder right there. The crowd is letting Kurt Angle know he sucks in case he had forgotten, is a quote from Jim Ross, a commentator. And I love that that's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge at kayfabe. Hard work pays off, dreams come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do, is a quote from Scott Hall. It's even got a rhyme in there, so you can even find poetry in your pro wrestling. It's got everything. And the last one from Mick Foley is, I would rather hurt a man than love a woman.
Wow.
And something about that really struck me.
That is intense. There's a few layers to that one.
That's primal.
Yeah.
That's got violence, that's got sex, it's got everything.
Yeah.
It's if you want to summarize that frenzy of pro wrestling, it's the I would rather hurt a man than love a woman.
Wow.
All right. This has been Prose Cons, a special podcast on why all storytelling is wrestling and should be wrestling. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen, or leave a YouTube comment. We would love that. We would love to get this content out there. We also have a anthology all of us have worked on called The New Mythic. You can find that on Amazon in ebook or paperback. It's been nominated for awards, so you should check it out. And we will see you all next time.
See you later.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.